This incredible MOC you see in front of me is Pixel Dan's T-6 Jedi Shuttle. And this is actually specific to Ahsoka. We saw it in Rebels a few times. It wasn't as detailed as this. It didn't have as much exposed greebling, and it wasn't as heavily modified as this model is, because this is specifically based on the live action appearance in the Ahsoka show, which obviously had the model a lot more detailed and a lot more effort was put into it since it was a physical model. And it's notably different than the one we saw in Clone Wars. I think the most notable appearance of that was when Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Anakin crash landed on the planet with the father, son, and daughter, and they had to fix that ship up. It was just a lot less geometric in the design, and the paint scheme was a little different. It was a much brighter red versus the darker red here. And overall, some of the shapes were not as aggressive as these angles are, and the engine pattern in the back especially was something that Ahsoka modified, including a ball turret cockpit and an extra engine, which is super cool. This is definitely a much more visually interesting model than the normal T-6 Jedi Shuttle that we are so used to. And so when I saw back in June of 2023, he started kind of putting out teasers and some reels and photos about his upcoming model, and it caught my eye from the beginning. I thought it looked incredible. The details were insane. This whole section was actually white and it looked incredible. But then when he finally finalized the product, this section turned out to be gray. He updated some of the greebling here and there. It's perfect. This thing is absolutely gorgeous, and it's a perfect representation of what we see in the Ahsoka show. And it's just such a cool model. So much time, I can guarantee you, was put into this. I mean, I don't ever see Lego making it in this scale. I didn't think they were going to make it since the 2012 one, and honestly, they probably wouldn't have if the Ahsoka show didn't feature it. And so seeing it not only come back, but in this scale is surreal. This is an incredible model. As you can see, the side profile is obviously super important for this model because that's what you're going to be looking at all day. And Pixel Dan did an incredible job detailing this and putting great greebling, and even parts that might look a little bland on first glance, like a big chunk of dark red, has some reddish brown to show the age, because this did see a lot of action, and some tan in there. Even though he does have so many different pieces causing angles and textures, adding more pieces in the same color on top of pieces that are already that color, you wouldn't think would do as much as it really does for this wing, even when it is 1 or 2 plates extra on top. It's not a lot, but it's the perfect amount. He did a really good job of detailing it, but not overdoing it or making it look too thick or too overly textured, even down to things like this triangle shape here, and a grill that just takes some of the light, captures it, creates a shadow, and makes it kind of pop out a little bit more in the same color, but it just looks really cool. I love this cutout right here that uses one of those pneumatic hose nozzles, these bar pieces with the stud to create this really cool texture. Even a turntable base without the actual turntable piece on it that creates that really cool pattern, which is obviously accurate to the real in life model. And I just love how all of these shapes come together. This is a really nice use of this gear piece, which just adds a little bit more of a deeper texture detail. And then of course, these bar elements are one of my favorite pieces to use on MOCs. They just look really good. I like the shapes, and they make the model not look nearly as flat. They definitely bring a lot of depth to it. I especially love this curved hose piece. It's actually only connected by a bracket right here, so there's not much holding it on, and so it gets to kind of free float, and I think that looks really, really good. One thing I want to point out is that in his announcement posts for this model, a lot of the detail here was a lot less noisy, a lot more smooth, and was actually white, but he changed it to light bluish gray and added some hinge pieces and just some more detail and texture in there, which looks obviously more accurate and looks so much better, but also just kind of ties it all together. I think having different textures and colors in the model was definitely the way to go. And the light gray just looks really good against the red and white and breaks it up a little bit. Looks a lot like some sort of engine details that are kind of poking through. It looks like maybe some of the panels have been removed, and this is a little more of the interior workings. And these are the doors that we see Ahsoka come out. There's actually one on both sides, front and bottom, and also obviously on the other side. And they use these tool pieces in silver, which look perfect, are the perfect shape. I love how we captured that. And all of the angles that come around this entire thing to create such a nice smooth shape is really cool. Little notch here that's very accurate to the model. Having these subtle details is very appreciated to me, and as you can see, there's greebling in between the wing and the actual main part of the ship, and it just kind of pulls it all together. There's no side or angle that hasn't been thought about. Obviously, it's a mirrored image on the other side, so you're going to see the same perfect details on this side. I love this whole panel right here and how there's sort of a carved out section here and here that just show a little more depth, because all of those pieces that show the underlying plates and just kind of give you a little idea for depth and not a flat build, even these small pieces greebling right there, are what make this so great. It's not just random pieces thrown on, it's not just tiles, it's not just a stud, it's a stud with a hole, it's not just a 2x2 tile, it's a turntable, it's a bar piece, it's a grill, and the bar piece is over a grill, so you see light bluish gray. That's not just a 1x2 tile, that's an ingot piece, so you get those details. Same with that. That's not a angle matching up, they want to leave a little bit of dark bluish gray in between. It's not going to be all dark red. We're going to have some different colors in here. And there's a printed piece here for the intake, I assume, for the engine, which is really cool. And then all of these engine vents. And inside those, you have those pearl silver claw pieces and these wedge pieces with more grill detailing on them, which just looks so good. These are some of the newer pieces from the Slave 1, I think, from 2019. Might be the first time we saw those, especially in that color, and they work perfectly. They're a nice large brick shape, and the front angle of this shows you how thick those actually are, and that's actually quite a thick wing, but that's very accurate, and it tapers towards the top so that these slopes come forward and upward, and it definitely has a lot of electronics and bulk. In the real model, a lot of the mechanisms for the spinning of these wings is up in these pieces, capturing all of the different thicknesses, even a little bit thicker here with the same slope, but just pushed out a little bit, versus back here when we come down one plate in thickness, so that we're kind of staggering those different shapes. Just looks so good. Those things are small little details that instead of making this all flat to back here, it's a little bit staggered so that you get more depth and different shapes in there that you wouldn't otherwise get. Again, the detailing and greebling here is really nice. This gear is actually supposed to be dark gray, but Pick-a-Brick Online had that in white for about $1 less than I could have got it on Bricklink. So I decided just to put white in there, and it actually looks pretty good to me. In a perfect world, that would be dark red, but I think that white actually does look really good. Speaking of wrong colors, I think this one's much more important. This cone is supposed to be dark red. But when Pixel Dan came out with this model, the price of that cone skyrocketed to $40 to $50 on Bricklink. You could not find it for cheaper than that anywhere. Now it's kind of gone down a little bit. It's a $15 piece, which, keep in mind, before this model came out, that piece was about $2 to $5. So it skyrocketed. It's started to level out, but I don't see it ever becoming a cheap piece again because so many people have desired it for this model. So I have mine white, which I know is inaccurate, but honestly, it works really well with the overall color scheme. As you can see, it's kind of like a wedge of white, and it kind of just goes down with the cockpit, and the cockpit is just part of that white, and I think that kind of going in like that with the conical shape of the cockpit looks really good, actually. So even though that is the wrong color, I think it turned out to look actually probably a little bit better, in my opinion, than dark red would have looked. Speaking of which, this is the Kessel Run Millennium Falcon cockpit, which is really cool to see it used here. This is the size of a Lego Millennium Falcon cockpit, like a play scale one, and that's what's being used on the UCS version, which, if that gives you a sense of scale, that's really cool. This is just such an interesting, unique shape, and I can actually take the whole piece off. It's just attached with a Technic axle, which is very strong. It's actually attached the same way a Millennium Falcon piece would be attached, and we can see two seats, which obviously it's not as big as it should be. It's a little bit cramped, but it's big enough for Ahsoka and Hu Yang to be in, which is really cool. It's got this little sensor radar piece, a lever, which I assume is for light speed, and then this little bar control piece, which is just for controlling the speed and the tilt of the actual ship. And then you have another printed control panel that we see in a lot of LEGO Star Wars sets, and he didn't slack off with this sort of dash. It kind of comes out in a nice shape this way, and it's not just, you know, flat or anything. It has a grill detail up here. Just the shapes overall are meant to match the cockpit to the best of his ability in this size, and it looks really good. It's got a good size cockpit, and it looks perfectly fine when you do put this on. And with figures, it fits pretty well. They have to lean back a little bit so they aren't touching the top, but it looks really cool looking through that and seeing details inside of this cockpit. So I'm going to try my best without a stand to put this horizontally so you can kind of see how it would look if it were on that stand, which he does provide, which I don't think looks as good as the vertical one. So we'll take it off of the stand, which you do by just pulling upwards. These pieces aren't connected or anything, they just slot in, and we'll put that off to the side. And then when we pick this up, there's these clear bricks, as you can see, and they're under and over, and they lock into these little 2x2 modified plates. Okay, careful with that. Trying to be real careful. This is actually my first time putting this horizontal, and I didn't realize it till now, but the cockpit actually does align with that, so I'm going to put that the correct way, in the correct orientation, and I'm going to support the wings, hopefully, while I rotate that like so, and lean it a little bit forward so you can get a really cool view of that angle, which I think looks super, super cool. I think that honestly, the shaping here looks a little cooler with the big red cutout that you can kind of see as a flat wing instead of it kind of coming out and not being as visible. You can see all of that block of red, which looks really cool. It's putting a lot of stress on that neck point, and this is kind of where everything's connected. It's a lot of weight to put there, so I want to be careful with it, but it can do that, and there is an option to buy a stand that displays it like this. And while we're down here, let's take a peek at the back engines. As you can see, I love the detail here. It looks really cool in this landed position and in flying mode. So let's get it back into flying mode and take a better, more detailed look at the back and the sides of this ship. Ooh, I don't like that. I guess you could call that the handling portion of this video, but as you can see, the engines look great. There's this little bubble turret up here, which is supposed to have a figure in it. Obviously, it's not minifigure scale, but it is so close to it that it really doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. I think that having it at this scale allows Pixel Dan to have as many details in it as he does. So we have this turret. These actually can turn side to side, although I assume it's probably not supposed to do that. That's not a feature in the actual ship. And then we have 3 engines. These are all the same size, and then this one below is a little smaller, and Pixel Dan, for a good reason, likes these roller skate pieces. They are very detailed and look really good, and he puts them all throughout this model, and so that's really cool. On the smaller one, it's got those. On the bigger one, it's got binocular pieces so that they all look like they're the right sizes. And as you can see, there's even details under here. There's a little platform here that is accurate to the design in the ship, and one of my all-time favorite pieces, and basically every use I've ever seen it used as, I've loved this elbow macaroni piece. Looks so cool. There's 2 of them on either side, and they're nice hoses that kind of, at least I assume, feed fuel into the engines, and I think look really cool and add a nice little curve back there. Let's take a moment to kind of look at the whole thing. You can see all of the shapes. I love all the angles, this notch cutout up here, this little square cutout, and then obviously you can see how jagged it is, but it's all very intentional and creates such a cool shape on the back instead of being a little more smooth. I like the rugged aspect of Ahsoka's specific T-6 shuttle. And I want to show off one more thing before we talk about the stand, which is the greebling on the sides. So a lot of the pieces do have to connect together, like you just see the plates pushed together, but he was able to include slopes and different stud and grill and tile and even some round tile texture, which looks really good. Obviously, Now, I do have to admit, I left a little red piece in there, forgot to ever find the light gray version of that, but nonetheless, that continues up top with the greebling going down the front, and it's using hinges and ball joint connections, so you get different shapes. Even the ball joints look good. Usually ball joints are the sore spot, like we see the 2020, was it, TIE Fighter that had the ball joints that were supposed to be light gray, but they were still in dark gray and they looked bad. But here, having that little ball connection looks actually nice. Having a little spot of dark gray is really cool. So there's a very simple design for this, but it's very effective. Now, one last thing that I think is really important is talking about the stands, and this stand for the horizontal specifically. Because as you can see, it's leaning kind of heavily, and I really don't like that, because when you're moving it, or when you're just, kind of walking around and maybe it shakes the ground a little bit, it wants to lean from that side or that side, and I don't really like having that much of a wiggle on something this heavy and this honestly kind of fragile and hard to build, and I don't want to have to try to rebuild this and piece it all together. So something like this definitely is a little bit worrisome to me. I've never had any problems. I'm not really honestly worried about it, but I do wish that there was some way he could have tried to either build the stand that will hold it a little bit better, or just kind of chunk up those pieces inside there so that it's a little bit stronger of a connection. Now, as someone who has tried to build a few MOCs in the past, I could definitely not figure that out. I don't know how we could do it, but I think there could be a solution that's a little bit better than the current one right now, because those lift arms do tend to bend a little bit, and I don't really like that. The other problem I have with the stand is that it's really expensive. Now, does it look good? Of course, and it looks really nice on display with the model. It doesn't take away from it. I don't really like the light bluish gray here, and that gets into something else that I don't like about this stand, is that if you so choose, which I did not, when you buy it, the parts list comes with all of the parts to add crates and some hand railings and just some other pieces that you can use to display your Rebels figures at the base of it. So you could have Hera and Sabine, and then Hu Yang and someone else on the other side, and it comes with these little handlebars that it maybe looks like they're on some sort of balcony, and it's got crates, so it looks like it's maybe a Rebel-based balcony, and they're just kind of displayed there, and it's light gray, so you can kind of see them a little bit better, but I kind of prefer not to spend so much money on the stand. I'm buying it for this beautiful model, and I don't want to have to spend all of my money on the stand, which does cost about $45. So you can actually kind of get this set for $500, and it's just the stand costs so much. All of these black tiles are 1x6s. I think it would have been smarter to use 2x2s, because those are cheaper and easier to source than 1x6s. And I think that just having 1x6 tiles there, and so many of them, and building up the sides so much, which is mostly cosmetic, not structural. He wanted to have the curve along the edge, which I do like, but I think that having it squared off would have been fine too, and obviously would have been so much cheaper. So while I do really like it, even the inside bricks are Technic, the square bricks, the 4x6 bricks, which are about 30, 40, 45 cents each, instead of maybe using really long Technic bricks that could have connected in a linear form instead of as squares, would have been a lot cheaper and the same structural integrity. So I do kind of wish that some more thought had been put into how much the stand costs, because as I said, I'm buying the model for this huge, beautiful T6, and I don't want to have to spend more than I want to on a stand. And I think that maybe there should be two different versions. You can buy a simple stand, or you can buy one that has all the accessories and handrails and the nice modified tiles, because these aren't cheap either. So all of that to say, I think that the model itself is perfect, and the weakest part of it is the stand. Overall, I have trouble finding something to complain about, and that's really, really rare and a big compliment to me for any MOC builder. I've built a lot of MOCs, I've built a lot of Lego sets, and this is one of the most perfect models I have ever seen, let alone have had the privilege to build. It was a journey. I collected pieces for this for about 6 months, and now finally having it built in front of me, it was worth it. I absolutely love this. I think the one thing that I could definitely complain about and wish was a little bit better was the stand and the stand connection. But how do you even come up with this connection, let alone get it to be this secure? It does wobble, but it's not going to fall over. It does lean a little bit, but I'm not worried about it falling off my shelf at night. And I think that that's enough that I definitely can be happy recommending this. The stand that holds it kind of in the horizontal landing position is not really my favorite. I think it looks kind of bad. So if you do want to put this at that angle, firstly, it'll take up a lot of space, but I also don't think it looks very good. So, should you buy Pixel Dan's T-6 Jedi Shuttle? This is a crazy expensive MOC. It's $550, nearly $600 after the instructions, and some of these pieces are really hard to come by, this red cone especially, and while that's coming down in price just a little bit, it's still so expensive, and you're obviously putting so much money into this base. Is it worth it? Well, I think so. With the amount of effort and time that he obviously put into designing this, there are so few flaws for me to pick out that I think even a Lego UCS set couldn't get as good feedback and as good of a rating from me. I don't think there's anything comparable to this in the level of detail and complexity at this scale. It's such a fun and interesting build. While you're building this 4 times, it's not that repetitive and it actually goes by pretty fast. Most of your time is in this back section, and that's a really fun part to build. So I definitely would recommend it on that front if you do love the building experience, which I think is a really big part of MOCs. And as someone who bought $30 instructions, I would love for my building experience to be perfect, and there was not a single issue in the instructions that I picked up on, at least, which is super cool. Now, I will say, I think my one major complaint about this would have to be how wobbly this stand is. It's kind of scary sometimes when I'm trying to move it around, but even when I bump into the shelf, it doesn't wobble very much, and I'm honestly not worried about it falling. I've had this on display for a while now, and I'm not worried. It's never fallen. It's never even made any weird noises. Every once in a while, I'll push the sides in just to make sure they're secure and fastened to all those studs inside, but I can definitely recommend this model, and I definitely don't think you have to worry about it falling over. There's also a lot of weight on these bricks right here, and I was worried about that at first, but these are very strong, and they're not at all in any way gonna rotate. I mean, I'm wiggling this pretty hard. They're not gonna rotate. They're stuck in place. The front does tend to kind of fall off, but if you just push that in, you're fine. That's it. That's the extent of my nitpicks with that, and that's me really trying to find things about this that I can't recommend about it so that I can be as honest as possible. But really, I think that this is one of the best MOCs, if not the best MOC out there right now. And at this scale, Pixel Dan was able to capture the perfect shapes and greebling. All these pieces are intentional, and if you look at the actual prop, they all match and line up. Even the trenches and all the grills he puts in there all line up with the actual prop and how it looks. So there's so much time and effort put into making sure that these pieces look good. You can't compare anything to this, and that's my personal opinion. I know everyone might not agree, and there's probably a lot of people who aren't a fan of this ship, but if you are a fan of the T-6, if you're a fan of Ahsoka, if you're a fan of the Ahsoka show, if you're a fan of Rebels, I think that this is a must-have. If you're a MOC collector, you like building MOCs, I cannot see why you wouldn't get this. For me, it cost about $250 over the course of 6 months, slowly buying pieces. If you do really want it, maybe hold off on a few smaller MOCs and just build a small collection slowly over time. Maybe buy $25 worth of parts here and $30 worth of parts there until you have it built, because I think that's definitely worth it. Waiting kind of makes you really excited to build it too, and you get to kind of have something to look forward to. Every order you get, you're a little bit closer. You get to go through your wanted list, delete all the stuff you have, and it's really exciting. You can see yourself check off the marks on what pieces you have, and you get slowly closer to being done. You get to build up a giant collection. Definitely try and sort your pieces before you build this. It was a nightmare just dumping them all in a pile, and I think a few came out scuffed because of that. But regardless, all of that to say, this is why Lego exists. MOCs like this are why I love building MOCs and collecting MOCs. This model is gorgeous. I can't say enough about it, honestly. This is one of the coolest things I've ever got to see. But that's about it for this review. Thank you for watching, and if you've made it all the way through, I really appreciate the support. Definitely go check out his Instagram. Go check out his Rubricable page. He has made so many other incredible models. This is just one out of many, and if you like this building design and style, you'll definitely like his other MOCs. So I couldn't recommend this more. Comment below what you think about this model, and I'll see you next time.